McConkey.
Welcome back to Propology 101, and I think it's time we discuss what happened to poor Greedo. And to talk about poor Greedo, we should talk about the Greedo Killer. This is the second hero blaster for Han Solo in A New Hope. Now, this blaster came about when they were filming in England. They were using a rental from Bapti. And when they finished production in England and came home, the only real major scene left to be filmed was the cantina scene. And the cantina scene was filmed here in the US. So since the original DL-44 was a rental and had to stay in England, the crew put together this. This was only used in the cantina scene. This is pretty much why this version of the DL-44 is called the Greedo Killer. It only did one job. It filled in for the hero for the cantina scene. And starting out, we always start with the body of the blaster, and the body of the blaster is not a Mauser C96. It is actually a Model Gun Corporation replica of a C96. Right off the bat, we're going right into Model Gun Corporation. And of course, Model Gun Corporation was a company that made high-end replica firearms through the 50s, 60s, 70s, and I think they finally went out of business in the 80s. That's where we have this. The Greedo Killer is based on one of their replicas. And also, moving on down from the body of the blaster, let's go to the scope and the scope mount. The scope, it's a compact super scope. These were manufactured in Japan. In the 60s and 70s, Japan was putting their manufacturing and somewhat precision manufacturing to good use, and they were making tons of different things and manufacturing and sending them all over the world. Everybody thinks about radios and stuff like that. But they were actually making a lot of scopes and stuff like that. Matter of fact, at one point, Kmart had an entire line of scopes that all came from Japan. They had the Kmart logo on them, but they were manufactured in Japan, and many of them were manufactured by the same companies. And one of those companies would have been the compact company that made the Super Scope. Now, the scope mount itself is a mystery. I've scoured the visual library of the internet. I've looked at World War I all the way through World War II and 50s and 60s scopes, and basing my scopes also in Russia, Italy, the United States, Great Britain, and Germany, trying to find a link or something to identify any of these scope pieces, and also the same thing for the hero version also. Came up with nothing really, except for a decent theory on a Mosin Nagant for the A New Hope hero version. But on this one, this is pretty much a custom build. It is made from multiple different parts, which actually leads me to believe that if there are real scope mount parts in here, they are cut and modified to fit this design. And basically, this overall design, they were trying to reproduce this design here. They weren't going for point-on-point accuracy. They were just going for a general overall look, obviously. It has two 1-inch Weaver scope rings of similar style to what was used on the ANH DH-17. It's a similar scope mount. There are three main parts that make up the scope mount. It's the rail, or the mounting bar, the center section, and then the upper section. The upper section has a Picatinny-type rail on it for the scope rings to clamp down on. Also, there are three large discs with flathead screws passing through. It looks like these two on the outside would be passing through into the gun body, which is a Model Gun Corporation, so they owned it for production so they could drill and tap holes and run it right in. The center one is probably just going through the centerpiece and the mount bar. The center section is also attached to the mount bar with two flathead screws, and the upper section is mounted to the center section using two more flathead screws. So that's pretty much the components and what makes up the scope mount for the Greedo Killer DL-44. Also, the flash suppressor is a M9 flash suppressor from the American M3 submachine gun, also known as the grease gun. That's where the flash suppressor comes from. And finally, as far as greeblies go, there's not much on this blaster except for this front grille. People refer to this as the heat sink, and it obviously does look like it's some sort of heat sink for some sort of piece of electronics, and it's probably just a found part. We don't know where this piece comes from either, but that is basically everything that makes up the Greedo Killer. Join us next time when we break down another DL-44.